Greetings, first year honors students, um, class of 2024. It was so wonderful to see so many of your faces at our online orientation. And I just wanted to offer a few minutes of reflection, some words of advice as we begin our academic journey together this week. I wanted to begin with a story about the time when I was in your exact same shoes, a brand new college student. So I grew up in Michigan in a really kind of small factory town in West Michigan, and I went to college in Colorado where my cousins lived. So looking back on my hometown, it was a mixed bag, like some other parts of rural middle America today. There was some poverty, some middle class houses, even some big houses together in the woods. And when families from my high school had money, they often bought the things that I call like country money, sometimes buys ATVs, dirt bikes, jet skis, maybe private access to the rivers and lakes for freshwater swimming and fishing. It was a little scrappy in places, but in high school, I was mostly happy, totally surrounded by friends. And when I graduated high school, I was really brimming with confidence. Yet when I went to college, to be honest, it all totally came very suddenly and without warning to a screeching halt. In Boulder, Colorado, where I went to school, the people were unlike anyone I had ever met before. There were students from sunny Western states, tall and blonde, people who ran marathons and drove Rovers, whose parents had second homes in Vail and Aspen. All the people in Boulder, at least it looked like to me, were athletic and perfect looking, and the sun constantly shined there in a way that kind of felt eerie. And for the first time in my life, I found myself kind of like plunged into the shadows. I felt puffy. My Midwestern accent felt embarrassing, my giant sweatshirts uncool. And on top of that, I was placed somehow in the international dorm. And if someone would have asked me, "So who are you? Where are you from?" I remember feeling just like answering, like, nobody, I'm nobody, from just the middle of nowhere, especially compared to my roommate who was from Vietnam and all the students from LA and all these like wonderfully un-Midwestern locales. And, at the time, my freshman year in college, if I would have really done some soul searching to look within, I would not have found, a true self that I could kind of reveal to all these strangers at orientation. But I was just kind of a mess of anxiety and confusion. And I remember during my orientation week, I saw a group of freshmen in the quad just sort of outside my dorm room window, making plans to go to a concert. And I was about to leave my room, but instead of actually walking past them, I kind of hid and waited in my dorm until they dispersed. I didn't want people to feel like obligated to invite me or embarrassed for leaving me out or feel sorry for me. It just felt so much easier just to kind of like hide, do my own thing, not bother anybody. And so my whole freshman year, I kind of hid, try to do my own thing, not bother anybody for more or less the whole year. I often wore this black T-shirt depicting the face of the writer Franz Kafka, but it didn't exactly have the intended effect because I'm unclear what effect I intended because I didn't even really know who Kafka was. But in my classes, it was a Jewish professor with a gray ponytail in a course on religion in the contemporary world who helped bring me out of hiding. He helped me see, first of all, there's no such thing as a nobody from nowhere. There's empirically no nowhere in the world. So when we learned about Irish American Catholicism, for example, suddenly my own little family background, which I had never really thought about and certainly thought about as anything interesting, suddenly, kind of came into focus. The Irish Catholic humor, or my grandmother's devotion to particular saints, the drinking, the silence around sexuality, all of it so Irish Catholic. So this bland and confused sense of who I was started to have some more coherence, some specificity, some detail, but were all enunciated in a language given to me by the authors my professor assigned, not just from looking within. And more than that, when we learned about evangelical Christianity, suddenly so many families from my high school made more sense. We were culturally Catholic minorities in a land of Protestants, but I had never really thought about that before or seen that. But then something even more amazing happened. I began to learn in my classes about things that had nothing to do with me, about where I was from. But they awakened a sense in me of who I wanted to become, the kind of world I longed to create, but had never known from my hometown. And I know so many of us have been home for so long since March. So many of us are still home, and we won't be forever, but we're yearning to learn about something else. And all of that is possible in our classes. And it was for me. And for me, it was this Jewish professor named Martin Buber. It was his answers to the questions about how we find our way to God now that religious belief has become so challenging for modern people. It was his 1923 book, I and Thou, that proposed a theology of what he called relationality, the idea that what matters is not God in some sort of abstract intellectual terms, but God's being is made manifest in moments of pure relationality when neither subject is dominated, objectified, or subsumed under some universal. God's nature is revealed through the dynamics of authentic communion. So, with all this, like this excitement of all these ideas, I began to come out of hiding, not right away and not with a big group, but like a couple people by the end of my first year, and mostly my sophomore and junior years, particularly people in what eventually became my major. Other people who were loving books just like I was and found books something thrilling, almost something holy. I mean, because serious academic study, particularly in the humanities, that was a completely new world. I had never even really been, honestly, to a big library, or I had never read any books like the kind of stuff I was reading in college. But with these new conversations, new books, new teachers, we each came into being together. And only then could I begin to answer questions like, so who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? What kind of world do you want to live in? Those conversations took me out of hiding and helped me think about far more interesting things than whether or not I was bothering anybody. That would have been such a dull way to spend my time. And I would say that probably most of you right now don't yet know the answers to these big questions about your life, even like where you're from, the world you hope for. And I know, these first initial weeks of college, you can muddle through, answers with ideas you already came to Fordham with. In other words, you might be tempted to hide and not bother anybody with your new sparks of insight or your questions. And at first this semester, it's going to be easier for all of us to hide since we'll be gathering so often virtually. But my advice is to give yourself some time to make your connections. It might not happen right away. Um, but eventually, I do think that you'll find people um, that might enable you to find some treasure and some spark, some interest. Of course, you're going to be able to kind of see people that might have been familiar to you from high school. Um, but there is more treasure to be found if you stretch. And one advantage I think that you have is Fordham's Jesuit heritage offers, I think, at least an interesting set of materials to think with. The Jesuit heritage, like all serious intellectual, spiritual heritages, is not something to be accepted blindly, but must be critically interrogated by new voices each generation. That said, one of the things I really do appreciate about the Jesuits is that they're very skilled at holding two seemingly opposite impulses together. On the one hand, with the Jesuits, there's this outward facing commitment to the wider world, go, 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 service, an impulse to leave home, commitment to global solidarity, exploration, cultural immersion. And when it was founded in 1534, St. Ignatius insisted that he didn't want the Jesuits to be just really inward looking, like monks, or tethered to one spot like parish priests, but he wanted the Jesuits to be oriented outside themselves, ready to go and serve at a moment's notice in the world. And some of you may have made contact with this sort of external focus of the Jesuits if you did the virtual urban plunge, or if you've learned during orientation about global outreach service trips that are going to be possible for all of us when this pandemic is behind us. But on the other hand, there's also this Jesuit commitment to the quieter, more still practices of attending to the landscape of your inner life, I would say, notions like memory, the past, where you've come from, desire, fear, hope, the future, how you feel about what might be next. In other words, the things you can only think about if it's not like go, 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 but like stop, reflect. One of my favorite stories is from one of the first Jesuits, a friend of St. Ignatius named St. Francis Xavier, who is Spanish but went on to a mission to India for the last 10 years of his life. And even though he was a 30-year-old man in India, Xavier missed his friends so badly that when he received letters from them from Europe to India, he cut out the little signatures of his friends from the letters and put them in a little satchel and wore it around his neck. That seems so Jesuit to me. And also there's something so endearing about that, like being sort of flung out somewhere in the world, speaking new languages in a completely new culture, but still kind of nursing that realm of memory, that realm of connection to home, even privately, quiet, even spiritually. And how different home must have seemed from the perspective of this new place. Memory work is important. You don't just go and not look back. And whether you're thinking about home this semester, while you're in your dorm room, or in your parents' basement while you're still at home online, or if you're commuting back home to your family on the D train with your mask on, all of you, no matter where you are right now, all of you have a new academic home with us here at Fordham in the honors program. And that's going to change about where you've come from. And there are interesting places everywhere. So don't listen to what people say about the Midwest. And especially around here, don't listen to what people say about New Jersey. And you'll learn after a while, don't listen to what people say about the Bronx, your new academic home. And many of you aren't here yet, but you will be. This won't last forever. And you may have heard the Bronx described as a kind of burned out den of deprivation and need. But the Bronx is truly an incredible site of cultural resilience, artistic creativity, and civic advocacy. I honestly cannot think of a more interesting place to be as you join the endeavor of the university to explore complex ethical, scientific, religious, political problems and summon alternative structures to combat inequality and racism, and work to create a more inclusive, just, and less violent world. And yes, also to think about who you are and where you've come from. And my hope for you this semester is that you get pulled into a piece of writing that evokes reaction beyond just agreement, disagreement, something more transformative, something that creates self-knowledge, or maybe even a thrill that leaves you wanting more. And may you, after all that, come out of hiding a bit and not care about bothering anybody with your questions and your excitement. And most of all, may you not keep that excitement to yourself, but spend it lavishly on a world in such dire needs of your brain and your fortitude. I love the way that Toni Morrison put it one time. She wrote, "I tell my students that when you get these jobs that you've been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is not a grab bag candy game." I think this too is how we at Fordham and in the honors program think about what all this education is for. And I admit that we on the faculty, in the honors program, we don't have all the answers about your life or the world that you want to create. But we have incredible conversations that we can't wait for you to join, conversations that are absolutely possible virtually. And these conversations now include you, our new students who we will soon cherish and whose gifts we will soon recognize. Right now, maybe you feel like I did 25 years ago. And to be honest, I still feel like that sometimes. Like I still would just kind of rather hide and not bother anybody. But there's just so much else to think about, so much important work to do, so many relationships awaiting. with one another, with our teachers, fellow students, with the Bronx, with the authors of our texts, and with our own histories. Be patient with yourselves, but don't hide for too long. Welcome to college. Can't wait to get to know you all better. Good night.